Get into the fitting room. Walter, now. And don't let them see you. Calvin Brooks barely moved his lips when he said it, but his hand closed around my forearm with enough force to stop me in the middle of the service hallway. 30 minutes remained before my daughter's wedding, and I was carrying my late wife's pearl necklace in a velvet box, expecting nothing more dangerous than an emotional walk down the aisle. Calvin's face told me otherwise. He glanced toward the bridal suites, then pushed open a narrow door marked Groom's Fitting Room. Ryan brought a lawyer into the room next door. He whispered, "He told my staff you were not to come near them." I stepped inside without understanding why. 5 minutes later, through a vent in the wall, I heard my future son-in-law discussing how to use my signature to borrow against a building worth nearly $5 million. And then I heard my daughter's voice calmly asking when the money would be available. My name is Walter Hayes. I was 68 years old that spring, a retired commercial contractor from Dublin, Ohio. And until that moment, I believed I understood the difference between generosity and foolishness. I had spent 42 years building Hayes commercial interiors from a used Ford van, 2 borrowed ladders, and a stack of invoices I kept beneath my kitchen sink. By the time I retired, the company had renovated hospitals, corporate offices, hotels, and half the restaurants in downtown Columbus. The work gave my wife, Margaret, and our daughter, Emily, everything I had never known growing up. It also took more from them than I admitted. I missed school plays, parent conferences, birthdays, and one piano recital Emily practiced for nearly a year. Whenever guilt caught up with me, I bought something: a bicycle, a car, college tuition, the down payment on her first condo. Margaret once told me, "You keep trying to write checks for time you can't replace." I loved her too much to argue and feared she was too right to listen. Margaret died 6 years before Emily's wedding, after a short and brutal fight with pancreatic cancer. In the final month of her life, she made me promise 2 things. The first was that I would not spend the rest of my years alone. The second was that I would stop confusing rescue with love. I failed at both. I never remarried, and whenever Emily needed something, I reached for my checkbook before I asked why. She was 34 when she introduced me to Ryan Mercer, a polished real estate consultant with a careful handshake and the habit of making older men feel respected. He listened when I discussed construction costs. He asked intelligent questions about zoning, lease structures, and historic tax credits. Most people Emily dated looked bored when I talked about buildings. Ryan leaned forward. He called my 3-story property in German Village a family legacy, a phrase that warmed me more than it should have. Looking back, I realized he was not only admiring the building, he was studying the lock. The property sat on a corner lined with brick sidewalks and old maples. 3 floors of restored offices above a row of small shops. I had purchased it 23 years earlier when the roof leaked. The wiring was dangerous, and pigeons had taken possession of the 3rd floor. Margaret helped me choose the paint colors. Emily, then Alavin, spent Saturdays drawing floor plans on scrap drywall while I worked. By the time I retired, the building was worth approximately $4, $8 million, and generated steady rental income. Legally, it belonged to Hayes Franklin LLC, a company I controlled entirely. I had always intended Emily to benefit from it after I was gone, but I had never promised when or how. Ryan seemed fascinated by the unused upper offices. 6 months before the wedding, he proposed converting them into premium creative workspaces. He estimated the project would need $750. Ling ling ling. Not a gift. He assured me, an investment. Emily should build something of her own. I told him I would consider it after my attorney reviewed the plan. Emily did not like that answer. We were sitting in my kitchen when she folded her arms and said, "You trusted strangers with multi-million-dollar projects for 40 years, but you need a lawyer to protect you from me." Her tone was soft, which made it more effective. I told her it was standard business. She reminded me that I had promised the building would someday be hers. I said someday was not the same as today. Her eyes hardened, and for a moment, I saw the child waiting backstage after a school play while her father was stuck at a construction site. "You always say family comes first now. she said, but the second money is involved. I become an employee asking permission. That accusation followed me for days. When she later brought over a folder of documents that she described as preliminary tax planning for after the marriage, I signed 2 acknowledgement pages without calling Martin Cole, my attorney. I told myself I was showing trust. In truth, I was purchasing peace. The wedding itself became another purchase. Emily and Ryan chose Bellwether Manor, a renovated 19th century estate 40 minutes outside Columbus. The original estimate was $90,000. By the time they added custom lighting, imported flowers, a jazz quartet, guest transportation, and a weekend rehearsal dinner, my contribution reached nearly $180. Ling ling ling. I complained once, quietly, and Emily asked whether I wanted her to remember her wedding as another day. Her father valued work more than her happiness. I paid the next invoice that afternoon. Calvin Brooks, the owner of Bellwether Manor, was an old client. 20 years earlier, I had discovered that a subcontractor was billing him for fireproofing material that had never been installed. Reporting it cost me money and delayed his project, but it may have saved lives. Calvin never forgot. When Emily booked his estate, he gave her the best weekend of the season and treated me like family. That history was the only reason I obeyed him when he told me to hide. The fitting room smelled of cedar, starch, and expensive cologne. Suits hung from brass hooks along one wall. A narrow bench stood beneath a mirror, and above it was an old decorative vent connecting the room to the adjoining bridal preparation suite. I heard papers slide across a table. Then a woman spoke. Marriage does not create an ownership interest in her father's separate company. Her voice was controlled and professional. I later learned she was Dana Whitmore, a transactional attorney Ryan had hired. Ryan answered, "We understand that. The ceremony changes the family dynamics. Once they're married, Walter will sign the transition documents. He already signed the tax package." Dana said the signed pages she had received were acknowledgments, not authorization to transfer voting control. Ryan lowered his voice, but the vent carried every word. The appendix solves that. Once Emily is manager, she can refinance the building without coming back to him every time. My first reaction was disbelief. My second was embarrassment. They were discussing my property as though I were already dead. Then Emily entered the room. I knew her footsteps before she spoke. The rhythm had not changed since she was a teenager hurrying down our stairs. "How soon after he signs can the loan close?" she asked. I pressed my palm against the wooden partition to keep myself steady. Dana answered that the bank would still require company resolutions, title review, and proof that the transfer was valid. Emily asked whether they could at least use the building as evidence of net worth for Ryan's investors. Dana hesitated. "Only if Walter has knowingly authorized it." Ryan gave a short laugh. "He will. He signs anything Emily puts in front of him." There was no anger in his voice, which made the insult worse. It sounded like a fact everyone in the room accepted. Emily did not defend me. Instead, she said, "I don't want him feeling tricked." Ryan replied, "He won't. He's been saying everything will be yours for years. We're just making him keep the promise." Dana warned them again that future inheritance was not present ownership. Ryan became impatient. He said several investors were expecting confirmation immediately after the wedding, and that any delay could destroy the project. Emily asked, "What about the bridge loan?" Ryan said. The lender had already seen a family asset transition summary and believed Hayes Franklin LLC would support the financing. Dana's chair scraped backward. "You represented that before approval?" she asked. Ryan answered, "I represented that approval was expected." Emily's voice dropped. "Ryan, you said nothing was binding yet." He told her not to panic. The project only needed time. And once my $750, 0, investment arrived, they could stabilize everything. Dana asked what everything meant. No one answered for several seconds. Then Ryan said, "Old obligation, temporary obligations." That phrase stayed with me. I had spent a lifetime hearing businessmen rename debt when they were afraid to say how much they owed. Whatever Ryan had built, my money was not meant to launch it. My money was meant to keep it from collapsing. Emily began crying, not loudly, but enough that I heard her breath catch. She said, "If Dad finds out before the ceremony, he'll stop the wedding." Ryan replied, "Your father will never risk humiliating you in front of 200 people. That's why today matters." I looked down at the velvet box in my hand. Inside were Margaret's pearls, the same necklace she wore on our 20th anniversary. Emily had asked to wear them as her something borrowed, though we both understood she expected to keep them. Through the wall, Ryan continued, "Walter knows what he owes you. He missed half your childhood building that company. This isn't stealing. It's correcting the balance." Emily whispered, "I know." Those two words hurt more than anything he said. Ryan was a man under pressure, perhaps desperate enough to believe his own excuses. Emily was my daughter. She knew exactly where my guilt lived, and she had agreed to use it as a key. I remained behind that wall until they left. Calvin opened the door a few minutes later and found me sitting on the bench, still holding the necklace. "Do you want me to stop the ceremony?" he asked. For one reckless second, I imagined walking into the ballroom, taking the microphone, and announcing what I had heard. 200 guests would watch Ryan's reputation collapse. Emily would never forget the humiliation. She might never forgive me. More importantly, I had heard a plan, not yet seen the documents. Anger would give Ryan time to hide whatever he had done and allow Emily to portray me as an unstable old man trying to control her marriage. I stood, straightened my tie, and told Calvin, "No, the wedding goes forward." He stared at me as if I had lost my mind. "Walter, they're coming after your building." I placed Margaret's pearls in my pocket and said, "Then I need to know how far they've already gone." When I reached the bridal suite, Emily was alone with her maid of honor. Her face brightened when she saw me. That was the hardest part. Nothing in her expression looked false. She hugged me and asked whether I had brought her mother's necklace. I fastened the pearls around her neck with hands that remained steady, only because I had spent decades working around dangerous machinery. In the mirror, she looked so much like Margaret that I nearly lost my resolve. "You're the most important man in my life," she said. I wondered whether love and betrayal could occupy the same heart without canceling each other. I believe now that they can. I kissed her forehead and told her she looked beautiful. As we waited outside the ballroom doors, she squeezed my arm. The music began. I walked my daughter toward Ryan, smiled for the guests, and placed her hand in his. But I made myself one promise as I stepped away: guilt would never sign another document for me. During the reception, Dana approached my table carrying a cream-colored envelope. She avoided looking directly at me. "Emily asked whether you could review this before they leave," she said. Ryan appeared almost immediately and placed a friendly hand on my shoulder. "Just the final administrative pieces," he said. "We can have the notary come by before the cake cutting." I let my eyes drift toward the champagne glass in front of me, then gave him a tired smile. "So, I've had enough to drink that I wouldn't sign my own birthday card tonight." He pressed harder, saying the timing mattered for a Monday meeting. Emily joined us and quietly said, "Dad, you promised." Every old instinct told me to surrender. Instead, I slipped the envelope inside my jacket. "Then one night won't change anything," I said. Ryan's smile remained in place, but his eyes did not. For the first time, he understood that the lock might not open. After the newlyweds left beneath a tunnel of sparklers, Calvin took me to his private office. I opened the envelope beneath a green banker's lamp while music thudded faintly through the walls. The first pages appeared routine management succession language, tax elections, emergency authority. Then I reached an appendix titled Expanded Manager Powers. It would allow Emily, once appointed manager of Hayes Franklin LLC, to borrow against the German Village property, refinance existing obligations, pledge company assets, and transfer beneficial interests without obtaining another signature from me. The document did not prepare her to assist me. It removed me. At the bottom of the final page, beneath the words "approved by sole voting member," was my name. Under it sat a clean digital image of my signature. I recognized it immediately. It came from a vendor agreement I had signed 4 months earlier. I had never signed this page. I had never seen it. Calvin leaned over my shoulder and whispered, "Walter, is that real?" I stared at the copied ink and answered, "The signature is real. The consent is not." I photographed every page, then returned the papers to the envelope exactly as I had found them. My hands finally began to shake, not from fear but from the weight of what the forged approval meant. If Ryan had merely hoped to pressure me, he would not have needed my signature in advance. If Emily believed I would freely agree, she would not have helped create a document that could survive my refusal. Someone had prepared to move forward whether I cooperated or not. I thought of the old obligations Ryan had mentioned, the investors expecting confirmation, and Emily's question about how quickly the loan could close. The wedding was not the beginning of their plan. It was a deadline inside a plan already underway. I looked toward the ballroom, where workers were clearing flowers I had paid for, beneath lights I had paid for, after a celebration designed partly to corner me into giving away control of the largest asset I owned. For the first time that night, I stopped feeling like a betrayed father. I started thinking like the man who had built the building they intended to take. The morning after the wedding, I woke in a guest room at Bellwether Manor, with my tie draped over a chair and the cream-colored envelope resting inside my locked briefcase. I had slept perhaps 2 hours. At 6:30, before the staff began clearing the last glassware from the terrace, I photographed every page again in daylight, checked the images, and returned the papers to the envelope. My instinct was to call Emily immediately and demand an explanation. Instead, I called Martin Cole, the attorney who had handled my company affairs for 19 years. "I need you to make room for me today," I said. He heard something in my voice and stopped asking questions. 10 o'clock. My office. Bring originals if you have them. I told him I had only photographs and one document I was expected to sign. "Then sign nothing," he said, "and do not accuse anyone until we know what this is." It was advice I almost followed. Emily and Ryan came downstairs shortly before 8, dressed for their flight to California. Emily wore my wife's pearls and oversized sunglasses, though the sun had barely risen. Ryan looked rested. Men like him often sleep well when they believe other people will carry the consequences. I waited until the hotel shuttle driver stepped outside, then held up the envelope. "Before you leave," I said, "tell me what this document does." Emily's shoulders tightened. Ryan answered first. "It lets Emily handle the building if something happens to you. Nothing dramatic." I asked why it authorized refinancing, pledging assets, and transferring company interests without my further approval. He smiled patiently, as if explaining technology to a confused grandparent. "Broad language is standard. Dana can walk you through it," Emily said. "Dad, this is exactly what we discussed." I told her we had discussed tax planning, not surrendering control. She looked at the lobby, checking who might hear. "Can we not do this here?" she whispered. That was not denial. It was damage control. I asked whether either of them had placed my signature on the final page. Ryan's expression changed for less than a second, but I saw it. Emily removed her sunglasses. "What are you talking about?" she said. I opened the envelope and showed them the copied signature. Ryan leaned closer, then shrugged. "Probably a draft placeholder. Legal documents use electronic signatures all the time." I told him electronic signatures required authorization. He said, "You already authorized the package." Emily stepped between us. "Dad, you're exhausted. You drank last night. Please don't turn this into something ugly because you're emotional." That word landed exactly where she intended. Emotional, not cautious, not deceived. Emotional. I looked at my daughter and asked whether she knew Ryan had told investors my building would support his financing. Her face emptied before she found an answer. "I don't know every conversation he has," she said. Ryan grabbed the luggage handle. "We're going to miss our flight." He kissed Emily's temple and added, "Walter, we'll deal with this when everyone is calmer." Everyone meant me. Calmer meant obedient. I should have let them leave without another word. But anger had already opened my mouth. I said, "There will be no loan against my building. And there will be no $750,000 investment until I understand what you've done." Emily's eyes filled. Ryan went still. She said, "So that's it. You punished me the morning after my wedding because I finally have a life you can't control." I reminded her that she had brought me documents under a false description. She answered, "You never read anything I give you because you don't respect me enough to take me seriously." It was a cruel reversal, and part of it was true. I had signed because I wanted to avoid conflict, not because I trusted her judgment. She used my guilt, but I had handed it to her. Ryan placed one hand against her back and said softly, "Come on. He wants a scene." Emily looked at me as if I were the one betraying her, then walked out wearing her mother's necklace. Martin's office occupied the 12th floor of a building downtown, the kind of place with thick carpet and windows designed to make expensive problems look orderly. He reviewed the photographs without speaking. Then he enlarged the signature on his monitor and compared it to a vendor agreement stored in my company records. "Sam image," he said. "Not similar. Identical. Same pressure marks. Same tail on the H. Same tiny break in the final stroke." I asked whether that made it forgery. He leaned back. "It may be unauthorized use of a reproduced signature, but intent matters. Execution matters. And whether this was presented as final matters. Right now we know someone inserted it." He explained that the appendix alone could not transfer control. Hayes Franklin LLC required a written member resolution, an amendment to the operating agreement, and in some cases lender or title consent. "They don't own your building because of this page," he said, "but they may be using the appearance of your approval somewhere else." Martin ordered 3 immediate steps. First, he notified the bank that no changes to authorized signers, managers, or borrowing authority were valid without in-person confirmation from me and him. Second, he changed access credentials for the company's electronic records. Third, he requested a complete credit and lien search for Hayes Franklin LLC. I asked whether we should send Ryan a cease and desist letter. Martin shook his head. "Not yet. A warning tells people what to hide." He wanted to know whether Ryan had applied for financing, promised collateral, or circulated my financial statements. I told him what I had overheard about a bridge loan and old obligations. Martin's face hardened. "Then we observe before we attack." I understood the strategy. I had used it in construction disputes for decades. When a subcontractor lied about materials, you did not accuse him before photographing the empty storage room. You let him submit the false invoice first. By noon, the bank called. The officer handling my commercial accounts, Susan Patel, spoke carefully. "Mr. Hayes, we received a preliminary inquiry last week regarding a $1.2 million bridge facility connected to a redevelopment project." I asked whose name appeared on the application. She said the borrower was Mercer Urban Ventures, but Hayes Franklin LLC was listed as an anticipated guarantor after a family ownership transition. I felt something cold settle under my ribs. "Did I sign anything?" I asked. "Not a final guarantee," she said. "However, supporting materials indicate your consent is expected." She emailed Martin a summary document titled Family Asset Transition Overview. The language was polished and deliberately vague. It described Emily as the incoming family manager and referred to the German village building as committed support for the project. Near the bottom was a quotation from one of my old emails. "One day, all of this will be Emily's." I remembered writing it after she helped organize Margaret's estate papers. The complete sentence had been, "One day, all of this will be Emily's, but I intend to teach her how to protect it first." The final clause was missing. Ryan had taken a father's private promise and converted it into a lender's reassurance. Martin asked Susan to freeze any further review until ownership and authority were confirmed. She agreed, but warned that a sudden withdrawal could trigger questions from investors and other lenders. By 3 o'clock, those questions had already begun. A man named Gerald Pike called my personal number and introduced himself as an investor in Ryan's redevelopment group. He said, "Ryan tells me you're reconsidering your commitment after the wedding. I hope this is just a family misunderstanding." I had never met him. I asked what commitment he believed I had made. He cited my $750,000 investment and the building's future support for construction financing. When I said neither had been finalized, his tone cooled. We invested based on the capital stack Ryan presented, I replied. Then you invested based on information Ryan presented. That is not the same thing. He hung up after telling me several livelihoods depended on my integrity. That evening, I called Emily. She answered from a hotel balcony in Napa, and I could hear music below her. I asked whether she knew about the $1.2 million bridge application. Ryan handles the lender conversations, she said. I repeated the amount. She responded too quickly. They were never going to use all of it. Silence followed. I asked, "How do you know that if you don't know the details?" She accused me of interrogating her on her honeymoon. I said my company had been named as a future guarantor without permission. Her voice sharpened. "You said you believed in the project." I told her belief was not collateral. She said Ryan had already hired consultants and reserved contractors because I had encouraged them. That was partly true. I had praised the concept. I had introduced Ryan to 2 architects. I had not authorized him to mortgage my property. "You are destroying this because you don't trust us," she said. I answered. Trust ended when my signature appeared on a page I never signed. She hung up without denying she knew how it got there. An hour later, my phone began ringing. My sister called first, then Margaret's brother, then a cousin I had not spoken to since Christmas. Emily had sent a family message saying I was trying to sabotage her marriage. That grief had made me suspicious, and that I had become increasingly confused about promises I made. She wrote that Ryan was worried about my drinking at the wedding and believed I needed rest. The message did not openly call me incompetent. It did something more effective. It invited everyone else to reach the conclusion. My sister said, "Walter, maybe you should let Emily help with the building. You're not getting younger." I asked whether she had seen the documents. She had not. "Then why are you giving me advice about them?" I said more harshly than I intended. By the end of the night, I had defended myself to 6 people and convinced none of them. Betrayal becomes easier when it arrives dressed as concern. My worst mistake came the next morning. I sent Emily a message accusing her and Ryan of planning to steal the building. I used the word steal because it was how I felt, not because Martin had advised it. She forwarded the message to Ryan, who forwarded it to Dana and several relatives. Ryan replied in a careful tone that looked reasonable beside my anger. "Walter, no one is stealing from you. We are trying to honor the succession plan you discussed for years. Your reaction is alarming, and we hope you will speak to someone you trust." Martin called within minutes. "Stop writing," he said. "Every sentence becomes evidence when people want to portray you as unstable." I knew he was right. I had allowed Ryan to choose the battlefield. He was no longer defending a questionable financial transaction. He was presenting himself as the patient son-in-law, protecting a distressed old man. I deleted nothing, because deletion would look worse. But I placed the phone in a drawer and did not touch it for the rest of the afternoon. The first useful break came from Calvin. He drove to my house carrying a folder from Bellwether Manor's event office. "You asked how far back this went," he said. Inside was the room reservation record for Dana's private meeting suite. Ryan had booked it 6 weeks before the wedding under the name Mercer Project Closing. He had also requested a color printer, secure Wi-Fi, document scanning, and access for a mobile notary between 4 and 6 in the afternoon. The ceremony began at 5. This had never been an informal conversation. It was scheduled as a closing. Calvin included statements from 2 employees. One remembered Ryan asking whether there was a corridor the bride's father wouldn't use. Another recalled Emily delivering a sealed packet to Dana the evening before the rehearsal dinner. Calvin looked ashamed, as if the deception had happened under his roof. "I should have told you sooner," he said. I told him he had told me at the only moment that mattered. Martin's forensic documents specialist examined the metadata from the appendix. The file had been created 7 months before the wedding, only 3 days after Ryan first asked me how Hayes Franklin LLC was structured. It had been revised 26 times. Dana's office account created the template, but another user made most of the substantive changes. The account name was E. Hayes. At first, I told myself someone could have used Emily's login. Then Martin displayed the revision history. The person using that account changed may assist with refinancing to may independently authorize refinancing. Later, The same account added the power to pledge company assets and removed a sentence requiring written notice to me. The final major change was made at 2:14 in the morning, 3 months before the wedding. A comment beside the revision read, "He may hesitate if he feels this is permanent. Keep the language broad, but frame it as emergency authority." I stared at that sentence until the letters blurred. Ryan's manipulation had been easier to understand. He was in debt, under pressure, and desperate to preserve an image. Emily's involvement was harder because I had spent 2 days trying to imagine her as someone cornered by a persuasive man. The revision history destroyed that comfort. She had not merely stood beside Ryan while he created the trap. She had adjusted the mechanism herself. Martin asked whether I wanted him to confront Dana immediately. I said no. My anger had already cost me once. This time, I wanted the whole structure visible before anyone knew I had found the foundation. I asked him to preserve the metadata, prepare a timeline, and find out what Ryan owed. Then I went home, opened the drawer, and read Emily's message to the family again. She had portrayed me as confused because she knew exactly how clear I would become if I ever saw what she had done. That night, I sat in Margaret's old chair with the wedding photograph the venue had emailed me. In it, Emily stood between Ryan and me beneath an arch of white roses. I was smiling. Ryan was smiling. Emily looked radiant, one hand on my arm and the other on her husband's. Anyone seeing the image would have called us fortunate. I thought about the fitting room, the bridge loan, the altered email, and the paragraph she had edited after midnight. Then I noticed one more metadata entry Martin had printed at the bottom of the timeline. The first version of the appendix had not been sent to Emily by Ryan. It had been uploaded from her own office computer before Ryan's account ever accessed it. The plan had not begun with a desperate groom convincing his bride to help him. At least part of it had begun with my daughter. I folded the page, placed it beside Margaret's photograph, and understood that the problem was no longer whether Emily had betrayed me. The problem was discovering what she believed I had done to make that betrayal feel justified. Martin found Ryan's financial trouble by following the one thing desperate people rarely hide: well timing. Mercer Urban Ventures had once appeared healthy on paper, with glossy presentations, architectural renderings, and a list of investors impressed by Ryan's confidence. Beneath that surface, payments from one project had been used to cover delays in another. Construction costs had risen, a major tenant had withdrawn, and Ryan had personally guaranteed obligations he could no longer meet. The total exposure was approximately $640, ling ling ling, spread across private investors, consulting fees, and short-term loans carrying punishing interest. None of it automatically proved fraud. Businesses fail, and people make desperate choices when they believe one more deal will save them. But Ryan had not presented my investment as a possible opportunity. He had presented it as a certainty. The German village building was not the foundation of a new project. It was the life raft he had promised to everyone, already drowning with him. I asked Martin to arrange a private meeting with Dana Whitmore. She agreed only after receiving a letter making clear that we were investigating the unauthorized use of my signature, not demanding privileged details about her clients. We met in a conference room at Martin's office on a gray Thursday afternoon. Dana arrived carrying no files. Her posture was rigid, and she chose the chair closest to the door. "I need to be precise," she said. "Ryan told me you had approved the transfer concept and that the remaining work was administrative." I slid the copied signature across the table. "Did you authorize that?" She examined it for several seconds, then shook her head. "No. I placed a blank approval line in the draft. I did not place your signature there." Martin asked when she first saw it. Dana said the version presented at Bellwether Manor already contained the image, and Ryan claimed it came from a previously approved document package. Dana admitted she had questioned the arrangement more than once. She understood succession planning, but the powers Ryan requested went far beyond what most parents granted adult children without safeguards. Emily insisted the authority had to be broad. Dana said, "She believed you might revoke permission once the project became real." I asked what that meant. Dana hesitated, then described a meeting 3 months before the wedding. Emily had said I often made generous promises, then imposed restrictions when she tried to act independently. She wanted the documents structured so the transfer could not be weakened by what she called a last-minute emotional reversal. The phrase sounded rehearsed. I remembered every time I had offered help and later demanded reports, budgets, or approval. In business, those were conditions. To Emily, they may have felt like strings attached to affection. Understanding that did not excuse what she had done, but it changed the shape of the betrayal. She had not simply chosen Ryan over me. She believed she was protecting herself from both of us. Dana then told us something that complicated everything further. Emily had asked for a separate memorandum stating that if Ryan failed to disclose all debts or misused company funds, she could remove him from financial control of the redevelopment. She did not trust him completely, Dana said. She viewed the transfer as a way to gain leverage over him as much as over you. Martin asked whether Ryan knew about that memorandum. Dana said she did not think so. The document had never been finalized because Emily wanted to wait until after the wedding. I sat back and felt my understanding of the plan shift. I had imagined Ryan as the architect and Emily as the willing accomplice. The truth was uglier and more human. Ryan wanted my building to rescue his failing business. Emily wanted the same building to rescue her marriage and free her from a father she believed controlled her with money. Each had been using the other while pretending they were building a future together. Martin obtained a copy of Emily's memorandum through the shared project file history. It was not legally binding, but it revealed her thinking. She wrote that the redevelopment would give her independent authority over a family asset that has always been promised, but never truly entrusted. She also wrote that Ryan's financial judgment required oversight and that she intended to assume sole control if the old obligations became larger than he had disclosed. One sentence stopped me. My father will resist, but he will eventually accept that this is the only fair correction for the years he chose the company over me. I read it 3 times. There it was, the private accounting of our relationship. Missed birthdays on one side, a commercial building on the other. She had assigned a market value to childhood pain, and I had spent 30 years teaching her to do exactly that. That night, I opened boxes Margaret had organized before she died. Inside were school programs, photographs, and handwritten notes from Emily. One drawing showed our family standing outside the German village building. I was drawn in a hard hat. Margaret wore a red dress, and Emily stood between us holding both our hands. Across the top, in purple crayon, she had written, "When Dad finishes the building, he will stay home." I remembered promising that. Then another project came, followed by another. I had provided safety, education, vacations, and every material advantage. I had also trained my daughter to wait for a future version of me who never arrived. When I finally retired, I expected gratitude for the empire I had built. I never asked whether she saw the building as proof of love or as the reason love had always been postponed. That realization hurt, but it did not erase the forged signature. Pain can explain a betrayal without making it acceptable. I began designing a response the way I once planned. A difficult renovation, protect the structure first. Identify hidden damage second, and never demolish more than necessary. The first layer involved Hayes Franklin LLC. Martin drafted amendments strengthening the requirement that any new manager receive approval from the voting member and an independent trustee before borrowing against the building. We also prepared a trust that would eventually hold the economic interest for Emily while keeping voting control with me during my lifetime. After my death, a professional trustee would manage the property for 5 years. Emily would receive income, but she could not sell, refinance, or pledge the building to cover Ryan's debts. I did not remove her as beneficiary. I removed the weapon she had tried to place in her own hands. The second layer concerned Ryan. I emailed him saying I had overreacted and remained willing to consider the $750. 000 investment. I told him I wanted a formal project meeting after the honeymoon, complete with lender materials, investor commitments, debt schedules, and proposed use of funds. Ryan responded within 9 minutes. His message was warm, respectful, and full of relief. He said he had always considered me a mentor and believed transparency would restore trust. He attached a polished financial summary that listed the redevelopment's projected costs, but buried his old obligations under a category labeled acquisition and development rights. Martin's forensic accountant, Elaine Porter, compared those figures with public filings, investor notices, and contractor claims. Within 2 days, she found nearly $500,000 that had nothing to do with acquiring or developing my property. The third layer was the most difficult because it depended on Emily making a choice. I wrote her a separate email. I apologized for the angry message and told her I understood why she wanted independence. I did not mention the metadata, Donna, or the copied signature. I simply asked whether there was anything about Ryan's debts or the project documents she believed I should know before the investment meeting. She waited a full day before replying. Her answer said Ryan had experienced normal business pressure, but that no issue threatened the project. She added that I needed to decide whether I trusted her, rather than constantly placing her under examination. I read the message beside the revision history showing she had modified the refinancing powers at 2 in the morning. I had given her a door. She chose not to walk through it. Ryan believed the reconciliation was working. He began sending me friendly updates and invited me to tour a competing redevelopment so I could see the market potential. During that tour, he talked about legacy, continuity, and the importance of transferring power before age made decisions more difficult. His language was carefully indirect, but the message was unmistakable. He wanted me to see surrender as wisdom. I asked how much personal capital he had invested. He said nearly everything he had. I asked whether any investors expected repayment from the new project for previous losses. He laughed and said, "Every business has moving parts." I stopped beside an unfinished elevator shaft and looked at him. Moving parts become falling parts when someone hides the bolts. For the first time, he seemed unsure whether I knew more than I was saying. 3 days later, the attack changed direction. My sister called and asked why Emily believed I had forgotten conversations about transferring the company. Before I could answer, Martin emailed me a copy of a petition filed in county probate court. Emily requested an emergency evaluation of my capacity to manage financial affairs. The petition did not ask for permanent guardianship yet. It sought temporary oversight and preservation of assets until a professional assessment could be completed. Attached were screenshots of my angry messages, statements from relatives describing my grief after Margaret's death, and a short video from the wedding reception. In the clip, I appeared unsteady as I confronted Ryan near the bar. The recording ended before it showed him pressing me to sign. It captured my anger but none of the reason. The petition described me as increasingly suspicious, impulsive, and vulnerable to making decisions that could damage the family estate. Emily claimed she was not seeking personal control but only neutral protection. Ryan submitted a declaration stating that I had promised the investment, then withdrew it abruptly after drinking. He wrote that my hostility toward him had escalated since the engagement. Every sentence contained enough truth to make the lie persuasive. I had grieved. I had become angry. I had withdrawn support. The filing arranged those facts into a picture of decline. Martin read it silently, then said, "They are not merely trying to obtain the building anymore. They are trying to disqualify you from defending it." The consequences spread quickly. A member of the charitable foundation where I served as volunteer treasurer called to say the board had heard about the capacity petition. He suggested I step aside temporarily until the matter was resolved. The words were polite, but humiliation rarely needs a raised voice. I had spent decades protecting my reputation for careful judgment. Now people who had trusted me with millions wondered whether I could balance a checkbook. The bank placed an administrative hold on any structural changes to Hayes Franklin LLC until counsel reviewed the filing. That meant Martin could not complete the trust transfer immediately. The protective wall we were building stopped halfway up, and Ryan knew it. I completed a private medical examination with a neurologist Martin selected. Not because I doubted myself, but because certainty would matter in court. The tests lasted 4 hours. I repeated word lists, solved pattern problems, explained financial scenarios, and drew a clock while a young doctor watched my hand. I passed every section, yet the experience left me shaken. Age had always been an abstraction, something visible in photographs and stiff knees. In that office, age became an accusation I had to disprove. When the doctor asked why my daughter believed I was impaired, I could not answer without admitting that she needed me to be impaired. That was the darkest moment. The threat was no longer losing property. It was realizing my own child had decided my mind was an obstacle. Martin advised keeping the evaluation confidential until the hearing. If Ryan believed the petition might succeed, he would continue relying on it and reveal more about the financial plan. I agreed, though silence cost me. Family members stopped calling. Two former business partners sent sympathetic messages that sounded like condolences. Emily texted once, "Dad, this is not punishment. I am trying to protect you." I typed several responses and deleted them all. Finally, I wrote only, "Then tell the truth at the hearing." She did not reply. The court scheduled an emergency proceeding 10 days later. Martin placed the notice on the conference table and pointed to the petitioner's name, Emily Hayes Mercer. Seeing her married name attached to the request affected me more than I expected. At the wedding, I had believed giving her hand to Ryan was symbolic. Now the documents suggested she had crossed fully into his version of our family, where my years of work were assets to be unlocked, and my resistance was evidence of decline. Martin asked whether I still wanted to avoid an open confrontation. I looked at the copied signature, the investor summary, Emily's memorandum, and the petition questioning my mind. "Yes," I said, "but avoiding confrontation is not the same as surrendering." That evening, I received an automated notice from the bank. Ryan had requested that the planned investment meeting be combined with a mediated discussion about management authority. He proposed that Emily assume temporary control of Hayes Franklin LLC while my capacity was reviewed. The request included a statement that delays threatened jobs, investor funds, and the future of the German village property. He was trying to turn urgency into legitimacy. If I resisted, I would look irrational. If I agreed, they would gain the authority they had failed to obtain through documents. I called Martin and told him to accept the meeting. He paused. "Walter, that could be dangerous," I answered. "Only if they know what I intend to bring." Before bed, I opened the trust draft and changed one instruction. Emily would remain the beneficiary. I wanted that decision recorded before anger had a chance to rewrite my values. Then I placed Margaret's photograph beside the court notice. For years, I had believed protecting my daughter meant preventing her from suffering consequences. Margaret had understood what I refused to learn. Protection without limits does not create safety. It creates entitlement. 10 days from then, Emily would ask a judge to place my decisions under someone else's control. Until that moment, I would let her believe I was wounded, isolated, and cornered. In truth, I had finally stopped trying to prove my love by giving her what she demanded. I was preparing to find out whether any part of our relationship could survive after I said no. For the next 4 days, I practiced surrender. I answered Emily's messages with shorter sentences. I told Ryan I was tired of conflict. I allowed 2 relatives to visit and find me sitting quietly in Margaret's old chair. Surrounded by papers I pretended not to understand. Nothing I said was false, but I let them interpret my weariness as weakness. Meanwhile, the neurologist completed his report. My memory, reasoning, judgment, and financial comprehension all tested within normal range for a man my age, with several categories above average. Martin placed the sealed report in his safe. "We reveal it only when they commit themselves," he said. Elaine continued tracing Ryan's obligations, while I signed the new operating agreement for Hayes Franklin LLC in front of independent witnesses. The bank's administrative hold prevented us from transferring the company into the trust, but it did not prevent me, as sole voting member, from clarifying internal procedures already required by the original agreement. Any new borrowing would now require written confirmation from me, Martin, and an independent fiduciary. Ryan still believed the gate was open. In reality, I had added 2 more locks. I called Emily on a Tuesday evening and told her I wanted the fighting to end. She was silent long enough that I heard traffic through her phone. "What does that mean?" she asked. I said I would consider stepping back from daily control if she agreed to one formal meeting with the bank. Investors, done, and a neutral mediator. I would review the management documents there and, if everything was transparent, consider signing. Her voice softened. "You would really do that?" I told her I was tired of being treated like an enemy by my own family. That part was true. She asked whether I planned to withdraw my opposition to the capacity petition. I answered, "Let us settle the business first. Then we can settle the court matter." She said Ryan might not trust a meeting controlled by Martin. I suggested the bank choose the mediator and host it in its main conference room. That removed her strongest objection. Before hanging up, she said, "Dad, I never wanted to hurt you." I looked at Margaret's photograph and replied, "Then the meeting will give you a chance not to." Ryan called 11 minutes later. His tone carried the careful warmth of a man congratulating himself for patience. "Walter, this is the right decision," he said. "No one wants to take anything from you. We just need a workable transition." I told him that before I signed any investment or management document. The bank would need a complete schedule of project obligations, including debts connected to previous developments. He resisted immediately. "Those are separate entities." I said my money would not be separate once it entered his company. I asked for investor agreements, personal guarantees, construction deposits, consulting contracts, and every representation he had made regarding Hayes Franklin LLC. He laughed lightly and said no, investor demanded that level of detail. "Then you should appreciate having one who does," I answered. He agreed, but added that unnecessary suspicion could cause the lender to walk away. I told him, "A strong deal survives questions." There was a pause before he said, "Of course, I had spent years negotiating with men who smiled while hiding change orders." Ryan's voice had the same tightness. He was no longer certain whether I had surrendered or merely stopped announcing my moves. 2 days later, he sent a digital folder containing more than 300 pages. Most of it was theater market studies, design concepts, rent projections, and photographs of smiling tenants in buildings he did not own. Elaine ignored the decoration and followed the cash. She found that Ryan had classified nearly $410,000 in prior losses as development rights acquisition, though no such rights had been purchased. Another $132,000, labeled pre-construction mobilization, had gone to repay short-term notes from an earlier project. A consultant's invoice for $98,000 belonged to a firm controlled by Gerald Pike, the investor who had called me demanding that I honor Ryan's promises. Elaine also found emails suggesting Ryan had offered Pike priority repayment once my funds arrived. "Your $750,000 would not renovate the building," she said. "At least 2/3 would disappear before the first permit was issued." Martin asked whether the documents proved criminal conduct. Elaine shook her head. "They prove concealment and misuse of categories. Whether it becomes fraud depends on what he represented and to whom." That was enough. Ryan's greatest vulnerability was not debt. It was the story he had told to survive it. Emily came to my house the following afternoon without warning. She stood on the porch wearing jeans, no makeup, and the pearl earrings Margaret had given her at graduation. For a moment, she looked 25 again. I invited her inside, but she remained near the doorway, as if entering would mean choosing my side. "Dana told me you met with her," she said. I did not deny it. Her eyes filled with anger. "You went behind my back to my own lawyer." I reminded her Dana had been hired for the transaction, not as her personal family counsel. Emily said I was building a case against them. "You filed a petition questioning my mind," I replied. "Do not act shocked that I began collecting facts." She accused me of trying to destroy her marriage because I could not tolerate losing control. I asked whether she had placed my signature on the appendix. Her jaw tightened. I did not create the image. That answer told me more than a denial would have. "Did you know it was there?" I asked. She looked toward the kitchen window. "Ryan said it was temporary." I led her to the dining room table where I had placed no documents, only 2 cups of coffee. I wanted the conversation to be about us, not evidence. Emily sat across from me and said Ryan had been under enormous pressure. One failed project had damaged his credibility, and the German village redevelopment was supposed to restore it. She believed that once the new project succeeded, every debt could be repaid and no one would lose anything. "You had the ability to help," she said. "You just wanted to keep deciding when I had earned enough trust." I asked why she changed the authority language at 2:14 in the morning. Her face went pale. For the first time, she understood how much I knew. Because you always change the rules, she said. You offer something, then turn it into another test. I admitted I had often attached conditions after making emotional promises, but there is a difference between resenting my conditions and manufacturing my consent. I said. She stared at the untouched coffee and whispered, I was going to tell you after the project stabilized. I told her that sentence was the reason I could no longer rescue her. She looked up sharply. Rescue me from what I said. From Ryan's debt. From the forged approval. From the consequences of telling lenders the building was available when it was not. She insisted she could control the property better than Ryan, and showed me the outline of the memorandum Dana had described. Emily believed she had built a safeguard. I asked whether Ryan knew she planned to remove him if the debts were worse than disclosed. She admitted he did not. Then your marriage is not a partnership. I said, it is two frightened people hiding separate escape plans inside the same transaction. She stood so quickly her chair scraped the floor. You don't get to judge my marriage after ignoring yours for 30 years. The accusation hit because Margaret had endured my absences with more grace than I deserved. I did not defend myself. You are right about what I failed to give your mother. I said, you are wrong if you think that gives you ownership of everything she and I built. Ryan arrived before Emily left. He entered without knocking, saw her crying, and immediately placed himself between us. What did you say to her? He demanded. I told him Emily was capable of speaking for herself. He turned on her and asked what she had revealed. That question changed the room. Emily noticed it too. Revealed, she repeated. Ryan recovered quickly, saying he meant what private financial information she had discussed. I told him the meeting would proceed only if he provided corrected debt schedules and signed a statement that Hayes Franklin LLC had never guaranteed his obligations. His face hardened. You encouraged this project. Investors relied on you. I said encouragement was not authorization. He warned that if I withdrew now, they would sue for promissory estoppel and interference with contractual relationships. Martin had predicted the threat. I asked Ryan which written promise he intended to produce. He said there were emails, witnesses, and years of statements that the building belonged to Emily in substance. Then file the suit. I said, discovery will be educational. He understood the word. Discovery meant sworn testimony, bank records, investor communications, and every version of the altered appendix. Ryan did not file suit. Instead, he attacked the company's banking relationship. The next morning, Susan Patel called to say Ryan's attorney had notified the bank that I was transferring assets to avoid commitments already made to investors. The letter referenced the draft trust and accused me of acting under Martin's undue influence. I asked how Ryan knew about the trust. Susan could not say. Martin discovered the answer within hours. Emily still had access to an old shared estate planning folder I had forgotten existed. She had seen a preliminary cover sheet, then shown it to Ryan. The trust details were incomplete, but enough to alert him. My attempt to protect the building now looked, from the outside, like a last-minute effort to hide it. The bank postponed the planned financing discussion and demanded a formal mediation addressing authority, lender representations, and the capacity petition. Until then, it froze all discretionary credit activity tied to the building. Several tenants used bank-managed payment systems, and the delay threatened scheduled repairs. Ryan had not captured the property, but he had made defending it expensive. For the first time, I wondered whether my plan had become too clever. I had expected Ryan to remain confident and expose himself at the meeting. Instead, he discovered part of the trust, frightened the bank, and moved the conflict closer to court. Martin said we could reveal the medical report immediately and seek dismissal of the capacity petition. That would protect my reputation, but it might also allow Ryan to withdraw every disputed representation before answering for it. Elaine offered a different approach. We would give Ryan a path that appeared to preserve the investment. I instructed Martin to draft a conditional funding proposal. The $750,000 would remain under consideration if Ryan, Emily, and every investor signed a written acknowledgement that Hayes Franklin LLC had never authorized a guarantee, pledge, transfer, or management change. The money would be placed in escrow and released only for verified construction costs. No old debt could be repaid from it. Ryan could accept transparency or expose why the project could not survive without concealment. When Martin circulated the proposal, Ryan called it insulting. Gerald Pike called it commercially impossible. Dana, however, said the conditions were ordinary protections for an investor entering a distressed project. Her response mattered because Ryan had been presenting her as the professional who approved the transaction. Emily called me late that evening. "Are you actually willing to invest under those terms?" she asked. I said yes, provided every statement was truthful. She was silent. I heard Ryan speaking somewhere behind her, telling her to hang up. I asked, "Do you know of any reason he cannot sign?" she whispered. "He says signing would make the investors think he misled them before." I answered. "Did he?" Ryan took the phone and accused me of setting a trap. "No," I said. "A trap hides the consequence. Mine is written on the first page." He ended the call. 10 minutes later, Emily texted me that she wanted the capacity petition withdrawn before the mediation. I replied that I would discuss withdrawal after she answered 3 questions under oath, or in front of the mediator. The questions were simple. Had she witnessed me sign the management appendix? Had she edited the powers allowing the building to be pledged? Had she known Ryan represented the property as future collateral before I consented? Martin said. Simplicity made them dangerous. Emily could not answer honestly, without damaging the case against my capacity and exposing the transaction. She could not lie safely because we possessed the metadata, Dana's statement, and the bank's records. I did not send her the evidence. I only sent the questions. She replied the next morning, "I will attend the mediation." I asked whether that meant she would answer. She wrote, "I said I would attend." That distinction told me Ryan still believed he could control the room. Calvin agreed to provide a sworn declaration about the private room. Printer, mobile notary request, and Ryan's instruction to keep me away. He apologized again for not investigating sooner. I told him his 5-word warning had given me the only advantage I ever possessed. Dana prepared her own statement confirming that she had not inserted or authorized the copied signature. Elaine completed a chart tracing the proposed use of my investment into Ryan's old obligations. None of these items appeared from nowhere. They had been sitting inside the story from the wedding onward, waiting to be placed in order. Martin organized them into 3 folders: authority, representations, and capacity. The neurologist's report remained sealed in a 4th. "Which one do we open first?" he asked. I said, "Whichever lie they choose first." The night before mediation, Emily came to my house once more. This time, she entered and sat in Margaret's chair without asking. Her wedding ring was still on her hand, but she kept turning it around her finger. She asked whether I intended to humiliate Ryan in front of the investors. I said I intended to correct the record. She told me he might lose everything. He already lost it. I said, "He has been borrowing against the belief that I would replace what was gone." Emily asked what would happen to her inheritance. I told her she remained the intended beneficiary, but the building would enter a protected trust. For 5 years after my death, she could receive income, but not sell or pledge the property. Her face tightened as if I had struck her. "So you are punishing me forever?" I replied, "No. I am preventing one terrible season of your life from consuming the work of 2 generations." She stood, walked to the door, then turned back. "I wanted one thing that was mine without you controlling it." I said, "Then build something I never owned." At 9 the next morning, Martin and I entered the bank's executive conference room. Susan Patel sat beside the neutral mediator. Dana occupied one end of the table. Gerald Pike and another investor sat across from Elaine. Ryan had arranged the room so Emily would sit between him and his attorney. When she arrived, I noticed immediately that she was not wearing her wedding ring. She did not look at me. In front of her lay the appendix containing my copied signature. Ryan began before everyone had fully settled. He said the dispute resulted from my recent confusion, that I had approved the succession plan months earlier, and that Emily had personally witnessed my consent. The mediator turned toward her. "Mrs. Mercer, is that accurate?" Ryan placed his hand over hers beneath the edge of the table. Emily stared at the signature. I opened none of my folders. I simply waited for my daughter to decide whether she would protect the truth, protect her husband, or protect the version of herself that needed me to be an incapable old man. Emily kept her eyes on the copied signature for so long that even Ryan shifted in his chair. The mediator repeated the question. Mrs. Mercer, did you personally witness your father approve this appendix? Ryan's hand tightened over hers beneath the table. I saw the movement, because I had spent my life watching what people did when words became dangerous. Emily slowly pulled her hand free. No, she said. The room changed in a single breath. Ryan turned toward her, but she continued before he could interrupt. I did not see him sign that page. I was told the signature came from documents he had already approved. Dana looked down. Gerald Pike leaned back as if distance might separate him from the answer. Ryan said, Emily, that is not what happened. She looked at him for the first time. It is exactly what happened. I felt no triumph. I only felt the terrible relief of hearing my daughter choose one true sentence after months of lies. The mediator asked whether I wanted to respond. Martin touched the first folder but waited for my signal. I said, I have 3 questions for my daughter, and she agreed to answer them. Emily nodded without looking at me. I asked whether she had edited the provisions allowing Hayes Franklin LLC to refinance and pledge the German Village property without further approval. She closed her eyes briefly, then said yes. Ryan's attorney objected that document drafting was not evidence of fraudulent intent. The mediator reminded him this was not a trial. I asked Emily why she made the changes, because I believed he would agree and then change his mind. She said, I wanted authority that could not be taken back once the project started. Her answer was painful, but it was honest. I asked the third question, whether she knew Ryan had told investors and lenders the building would support his project before I consented. She whispered, I knew he said the transfer was expected. I did not understand how definite he made it sound. Ryan laughed once, without humor. You understood everything. That was the moment Emily finally saw what partnership meant to Ryan when protection was no longer useful. He began speaking quickly, telling the mediator that Emily had designed the succession strategy and repeatedly assured him her father would sign. He said the project moved forward because she represented herself as the future owner. Emily stared at him. You told me the old debts were temporary, she said. Ryan replied that she had reviewed the numbers. She said she had never seen the personal guarantees or Pike's repayment arrangement. Gerald Pike stiffened and asked what arrangement she meant. Ryan told everyone not to be distracted by marital accusations. The mediator raised a hand, but Ryan was losing the discipline that had carried him through every earlier conversation. This entire project existed because Emily said the building was effectively hers. He said, Walter made that promise for years. We relied on it. I answered quietly. You relied on receiving property from a man you believed was too guilty to refuse. Martin opened the authority folder. He distributed the original operating agreement for Hayes Franklin LLC, the proposed appendix, and the forensic comparison showing that my signature had been copied from the vendor agreement. Dana confirmed that her office had created a blank signature line but had never authorized anyone to insert the image. She also confirmed she warned Ryan and Emily that marriage did not create ownership and that no refinancing authority existed until proper company resolutions were completed. Ryan's attorney asked whether Dana represented both of them. She said she represented the transaction and withdrew once she suspected material facts had been misrepresented. Calvin's sworn declaration followed. It documented the room reservation 6 weeks before the wedding, the request for a mobile notary, the printer, the scanning equipment, and Ryan's instruction that I be kept away from the meeting suite. The details transformed the wedding conversation from a misunderstanding into a scheduled attempt to complete documents under pressure. Ryan argued that none of those facts changed my years of statements that Emily would inherit the building. Martin answered that an expected inheritance could not be pledged as present collateral. He then opened the second folder. Susan distributed the family asset transition overview and the bridge loan materials. My old email appeared on the second page, shortened to remove the sentence about teaching Emily to protect the property first. Susan explained that the bank had understood the document to mean management transfer was imminent. Gerald Pike read the phrase, committed family support twice. and looked directly at Ryan. "You told me the guarantee was a formality," he said. Ryan replied that the family had approved the concept. Pike asked whether Ryan knew the company resolution had never been signed. Ryan did not answer. Silence did more damage than any accusation. The other investor began taking notes, no longer as a participant in Ryan's project, but as someone preparing to recover his own money. Elaine opened her financial chart. She showed that more than two-thirds of my proposed $750,000 investment would have been redirected to debts from earlier projects, including short-term notes, unpaid consulting fees, and the priority payment to Pike. Ryan called the categories standard restructuring. Elaine asked why the project summary described them as costs associated with acquiring development rights for my building. He said the terminology had been simplified. Simplified for whom? She asked. The lender, the investors, or Mr. Hayes. Ryan accused her of interpreting normal business movement as misconduct. She answered, "I am interpreting invoices. The money labeled for one project was committed to another." Pike demanded confirmation that his repayment had been hidden from the remaining investors. Ryan insisted it was not hidden, merely negotiated separately. The second investor stood and said he would request an immediate independent audit. The controlled image Ryan valued more than money began collapsing because the people he needed no longer believed his words. I then placed the conditional investment proposal on the table. I was willing to proceed, I said, if every dollar went into escrow and could be used only for verified work on the German village property. The proposal prohibited repayment of Ryan's old debts and required written acknowledgement that Hayes Franklin LLC had never approved a guarantee. Dana confirmed the conditions were commercially reasonable for a distressed venture. Ryan said no project could survive such restrictions. Elaine answered that a legitimate renovation project could survive them, only his debt structure could not. Susan announced that the bank was terminating the bridge loan review because the proposed collateral had never been authorized and because the application contained materially inaccurate representations. Pike requested that the record reflect his investment had been based on Ryan's statement that my support was irrevocable. The mediator reminded everyone that the session remained confidential, but the bank and investors were free to protect their legal rights outside it. Ryan's face lost color. He had not been arrested, ruined, or dragged away. Something more fitting happened. The people whose trust financed his identity stopped trusting him. Ryan turned to me and said I had deliberately destroyed the project after encouraging it. He threatened a lawsuit for promissory estoppel, interference, and bad faith withdrawal. Martin slid a blank legal pad toward him. "Please identify the written promise granting your company control of Hayes Franklin LLC," he said. Ryan referred again to emails and family discussions. Martin explained that any lawsuit would permit discovery of lender communications, investor statements, debt transfers, document revisions, and the source of the copied signature. Ryan's attorney leaned close and whispered to him. I did not need to hear the advice. Ryan stopped speaking about court. He looked instead at Emily and said, "Tell them your father promised you the building." Emily answered, "He promised I would benefit from it someday. He did not promise we could borrow against it before he was gone." Ryan said, "After everything I did for us," she replied. "You mean everything you hid from me?" She removed the wedding ring from her pocket, not from her hand, as I had assumed, and placed it beside the appendix. The mediator then addressed the capacity petition. Ryan's attorney argued that the financial dispute did not establish my competence. Martin opened the fourth folder and presented the neurologist's report. It found no evidence of cognitive impairment, diminished reasoning, memory disorder, or inability to manage complex affairs. The doctor's accompanying affidavit stated that I demonstrated a detailed understanding of the company, proposed transaction, risks, and alternatives. Martin also presented the timeline of actions I had taken after the wedding: securing bank authority, preserving records, obtaining independent review, and avoiding unauthorized transfers. "These are not the actions of a man incapable of protecting his property," he said. "They are the reason the property remains protected." Emily began crying quietly. She told the mediator she would withdraw the petition. Her attorney asked whether she understood the consequences. "Yes," she said. I should never have filed it. That admission restored my legal standing, but it did not repair what the filing had done to us. I had one final decision to announce. Martin presented the completed trust plan, subject to the bank's administrative clearance now that my competence had been established. Hayes Franklin LLC would remain under my voting control during my lifetime. After my death, the economic interest would pass into a protected trust for Emily. A professional fiduciary would manage the building for at least 5 years. Emily would receive income and could participate in planning, but she could not sell, mortgage, or pledge the property for another person's debts. Ryan objected that I was changing the inheritance to punish them. I said, "You have no standing in my inheritance." Emily looked at the documents and asked whether I was disinheriting her. "No," I said. "I am keeping one disastrous season from consuming what your mother and I spent a lifetime building." She asked why I would leave her anything after what she had done. I answered, "Because love and access are not the same thing." In exchange for my decision not to pursue a criminal complaint over the copied signature, Emily agreed to sign a sworn statement describing how the document had been prepared, confirming that she had never witnessed my approval, and withdrawing every claim that I lacked capacity. Dana agreed to preserve her records. The bank would make its own decisions about reporting the application, and the investors would determine whether to sue Ryan. I did not control those consequences and did not try to. Ryan accused me of using legal pressure to separate him from his wife. Emily turned toward him and said, "My father did not make you lie about the guarantee. He did not make you hide the debt. And he did not make you blame me the moment the room stopped believing you." Ryan said she was abandoning him when he needed her most. Emily replied, "You needed my father's building. I was just the way you planned to reach it." The meeting ended without shouting. That surprised everyone except me. Real collapse is often quiet. Susan closed the loan file. Pike and the second investor left with Elaine's chart. Dana departed after telling Emily to obtain independent counsel. Ryan stood alone near the window while his attorney packed the disputed documents. He looked older than he had at the wedding, not because 10 days had changed his face, but because confidence had stopped arranging it. Before leaving, he told me, "You think you won?" I said, "No, I think I stopped you." Those were different things. Winning would have meant getting my daughter back unchanged, restoring my reputation without scars, and learning that the betrayal had all been a misunderstanding. None of that happened. I kept the building. I lost the illusion that generosity could guarantee loyalty. Emily moved out of Ryan's house that week and filed for legal separation a month later. I did not hire her attorney, pay her rent, or cover the personal debts she had accumulated during the wedding and project planning. That restraint was harder than confronting Ryan. She called twice asking whether I could help just until things settled. I told her I would review a budget with her but would not write a check. The first conversation ended with her accusing me of enjoying her suffering. The second ended with silence. On the third, she brought a spreadsheet. We sat at my kitchen table and identified what she could sell, which expenses she could cut, and how long repayment might take. She cried when she realized it would require years. I did not rescue her. I made coffee and stayed beside her while she faced the numbers. The trust became effective 6 weeks after the mediation. I added a provision dedicating part of the building's annual income to a skilled trades scholarship named for Margaret. Young people pursuing construction management, electrical work, carpentry, and interior design could receive tuition support and paid apprenticeships. Emily initially assumed the fund reduced her inheritance. Technically, it did, but when I showed her a photograph of the drawing she made at 11, the one where she waited for me to finish the building and come home, she understood why I wanted the property to create opportunities rather than remain a private object of resentment. She volunteered to help design the program's materials. I gave her no authority over the funds, only work to do. For the first time, she contributed to something connected to the building without expecting ownership in return. Ryan's business did not vanish overnight. The investors ordered an audit, removed him from control of the remaining project accounts, and negotiated repayment plans. Pike sued him over undisclosed obligations. The bank declined further credit. Ryan eventually sold his interest in Mercer Urban Ventures to a partner for far less than he once claimed it was worth. I heard these details through attorneys, not gossip. I never contacted him again. He did not go to prison, and I did not need him to. His punishment was proportionate to what he valued. He lost the authority to shape reality through confidence. Every future lender would ask harder questions. Every investor would verify his promises. He still had the chance to rebuild, but only without my property and without my daughter serving as proof of family backing. Several months later, Emily asked me to meet her at a small diner near German Village. It was the place Margaret and I took her after Saturday mornings at the building. Emily arrived carrying a folder but no request for money. Inside was a repayment plan, confirmation that she had sold her luxury car, and a lease for a smaller apartment. She had also begun counseling. I spent years believing you owed me something big enough to fix what happened, she said. Then Ryan made the building feel like an answer. I told her I had spent those same years believing expensive gifts could erase my absences. We both turned love into bookkeeping, I said. She asked whether I forgave her. I answered honestly, not yet, but I am willing to know who you become after this. She nodded. That was less comforting than instant forgiveness, but more real. A year after the wedding, Calvin hosted the first scholarship reception at Bellwether Manor. The same ballroom where I had walked Emily toward Ryan was filled with apprentices, contractors, teachers, and their families. Emily stood near a display board explaining the program to a young woman who wanted to study architectural drafting. She wore no pearls and no wedding ring. She looked tired, capable, and more like herself than she had in years. Calvin joined me near the service hallway and said, "Hard to believe this started when I told you to hide in a fitting room." I smiled. It did not start there. That was only when I finally heard it. He asked whether those 5 minutes had saved my building. I looked toward Emily and shook my head. They saved me from signing. The rest required me to stop lying to myself. For most of my life, I believed a man protected his family by providing enough that they would never feel afraid. I now know fear does not disappear when you cover it with money. It learns to depend on money, defend money, and eventually confuse money with love. I kept Hayes Franklin LLC, but I placed limits around it that should have existed years earlier. Emily remained my daughter, but she was no longer entitled to every rescue. Our weekly breakfasts became ordinary and sometimes uncomfortable. We spoke about Margaret, Ryan, childhood, and the years I was absent. Some mornings ended warmly. Others ended with one of us needing space. That was not failure. It was a relationship no longer purchased in advance. At the end of the scholarship reception, Emily came to stand beside me beneath the white rose arch the staff had reused from another event. She asked whether I regretted paying for the wedding. I considered the flowers, the forged document, the court petition, and everything that followed. I regret believing the size of the wedding proved the size of my love, I said. She slipped her arm through mine, not as a bride needing to be delivered, but as a daughter choosing to remain beside a father who had finally learned to say no. We walked out together through the same hallway where Calvin had once whispered his warning. The fitting room door stood open and empty. I did not look inside. There was nothing left there that I needed to hear.